which meant that this scale tipped the other way as a result of expenses being more than the income. So for those that are not financially orientated, that gives you a good picture, helps you understand the finances. In that time, I haven't dealt with any figures, but the next couple of slides, we will do that. So let's just go on to the next slide, which is a comparison of the 23 to 22. Now, in some cases, the amounts were more than the budget. And the ones that were most above budget, where is it? Church giving, giving by churches and individuals. As a result of the load shedding experience that many of us have had, the Baptist Union has looked to have solar panels, particularly down at the office. And fortunately, someone donated that. And that, if the Baptist Union had paid that, that would have cost the Baptist Union around about $300,000. So included in that second figure there of 1046, there is just over $300,000 there, the value of the solar system that was added in. There's another one, bequest and other income. You can see that is quite a bit more than the previous year, and that is because of bequests which came in, which is obviously something we can never anticipate, but the bequests were quite substantial and came to an amount of 360,000 rand. And then fortunately, the membership fees were also above budget as well. So those were the ones that were above budget. We said that income on an overall basis was above budget, but within these categories, there was also some that were below budget. The one that I've already implied, pastoral fees. You can see that in 23, it was even less than in 22. And the amount by which the actual is less than the budget is of the order of around about 250,000 rand. So you can see that's a substantial amount. That, if we had extra 250,000, that would have far more than doubled that. Also, the expectation was in the budget that we would receive more by way of, towards missions, and that was also of the order of around about 250,000 less than the budget. And then the rent was also slightly below what was in the previous year, and that's partly due to, as you might be aware, there's cell phone towers on the property, and the ownership of some of them have changed, and there were problems with collecting rent, and so there were certain amounts that we didn't receive that we thought we were entitled to. So that just gives you a bit of an overview of the major areas where there were variations from budget in 2023. If we go on to the next slide, that deals with expenses. And you can see that there's a big increase in employment costs, and that is due to the national ministry leader coming on board at the beginning of 2023. So there's a full year of his salary where there wasn't that in the previous year. Now that had been budgeted for, so that's not really a problem as far as actual versus budget. I've already made mention of the campus where there was property-related costs and a loan impairment, and that was an extra cost of the order of close to 750,000 rand. So that was a large impact on the financial statements. But that's not the only areas as well. In 2023, churches were coming out of COVID, and so the Baptist Union made a decision that even though provision had been made in the budget for travel and accommodation costs, that they needed to do more than was actually budgeted for. So as a result of that, a lot more was spent on travel and accommodation in a number of categories. So we can see it in operating costs, the fourth one there, it impacted that there, the national ministry leader there, and emissions. Those three ones were all impacted quite a bit by extra travel and accommodation costs. And there were some others as well. The bottom there is the Baptist Youth, which wasn't in there in 2022. There was a decision made in 2022 at the Assembly that the Baptist Union should subsidize part of the summer camp costs, even though they weren't in the budget. And so that's why we've got this as a new expense as well. And then under missions, a new missionary came on board during 2023. It had been anticipated that this person would come on as a new missionary, but only later, 2024. This person, in fact, came on earlier. So that, in fact, had extra cost as well. And then also under national ministry, national ministry, the Baptist Union has also had changes in recent years, and one of them was a new council. And so that had to start operating, and it wasn't known what those costs were, and those costs were more than were expected by of the order of around about 50,000 rand. So if we go on to the next slide, that just shows you the comparison, also bringing it all together, what the income and expenses were. Those income and expenses ones are in red, indicating that we've already seen those amounts on a previous slide. And then we've got interest and tax. And fortunately, the interest has gone up. As we will see, there have been amounts placed on deposit with the trust fund, and obviously we've had fairly high interest rates, which has helped. And then also no tax expense, which has been saved, and that is as a result of the extra property costs, because the tax is related to the rent we receive less the expenses. And since the expenses have gone up so much more than expected, it has meant that there's no tax payable in relation to 2023. Okay, we go on to the next line. This just gives a bit of an overview of the Baptist Union for 2023. If we look at the accumulated funds, they've decreased. And we know why they've decreased, because of the deficit that was incurred. So that is shown improved? No. Previous 3 years, it was shown as improved. Loans owing, that's also gone up, but as I indicated, that is because the Baptist Union stands as a guarantee for the loans given to the campsite, and then bank balances have gone down as well. But that's not totally the full picture. We must also realize that the Baptist Union has also transferred some of their funds across to the trust fund, and that's what this last line is. And we can see that has gone up, and so that's positive. So the amounts are there with the trust funds, and the Baptist Union can call them if needs be. Now, I've said here, amounts in red are referred to elsewhere in the presentation, but I haven't mentioned that about these last two lines, but I still want you to remember them. First of all, I want you to remember that figure, around about 1,850,000. And then the second one I want you to just realize is the increase from 23 to 20, so 22 to 23, that's of the order of around about 700,000, and we'll come back to that shortly as well. So if we go on to the next slide, that deals with the combined financial statements. Why have we got combined financial statements? So we've got the trust funds and the Baptist Union that each prepare their own set of financial statements. But for tax purposes, they have the same non-profit organization number. And so they do need to submit financial statements to the tax authorities. So as a result of that, the financial statements are combined so that the Baptist Union can retain its tax-free status. So how do we prepare the combined financial statements? Easy. We take the financial statements of the Baptist Union and Trust Fund and add the two together. But we do make elimination. That is where the amounts that have been occurred between the Baptist Union and the Trust Fund. There might be income, there might be interest, there might be balances, and so we do make an adjustments for that. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to show you how the makeup of these balances was arrived at. So if we look at the next one, we can see there, we've already seen the deficit for the Baptist Union. The trust funds, big surplus. And then we took out what was going in between, and we saw that on the previous year, the difference between the 2 years. And that is as a result of certain amounts being shown in the Baptist Union as being owed to the trust funds, but the trust funds including as part of the equity. So we need to make an adjustment. So we can still see on that basis that that on a combined basis, the financial statements are showing a surplus. And that is largely due to the trust funds having certain investments in the stock exchange, and they did quite well last year. And so fortunately, so that has helped to strengthen the combined financial statements. Loans as well. So yes, the Baptist Union has loans, but those loans are to the trust funds. So on a combined basis, we can eliminate that. So we can see that on a combined basis, there's 1.6 million of loans. And those are loans that the trust funds have made to various churches around the country. Then we're going to deal on the next slide with bank balances and investments. We can see that Baptist Union, approximately 1.3 million. The trust funds, 8.7 million. So on a combined basis, cash and investments, 10 million rand. Not insubstantial amount there. And the equity, again, it's impacted by the amounts between the Baptist Union and trust funds, but still we can see there that the equity is of the order of 14 million rand, which is a fairly substantial amount. Now we're going to just look at the budget for next year. And we need to say, what are the major assumptions that are being made in the budget? The one is an increase in membership fees from 70 Rand a year to 80 Rand a year per member. And please bear in mind that there was no increase in 2023. So it's just a 10 Rand increase, which isn't much in any way. And then there's also an expectation that an increased number of pastors will be paying the pastoral fees. As we saw, we received less in 23 than in 2022. So there is hopefully going to be an increased number, but still, on an overall basis, the budget assumes that we're only going to get 75% of what is owed to the Baptist Union by way of membership fees and by way of pastoral fees. So if it's more than that, it's obviously going to help the Baptist Union in that regard. And then we're also looking to make some additional appointments of employees, national network developer and pastoral support. Some of these might only come into effect maybe at the end of next year or maybe even the beginning of 2026. We're not quite sure when some of these ones will take effect. The concern is this going to lead to a substantial increase in cost? We must bear in mind that the Baptist Union has received amounts that are designated to be used to fund these positions. And so while we haven't spent them as yet, we're holding them in reserves. So when these people come on, then we can bring those amounts into the income statement, and so as a result of that, that will have a much reduced impact on the financial statements. And I've spoken about the property as well, and the expectation is that the costs that are likely to be incurred in the 2025 budget will be less than is expected for this year. But I must also mention that in looking at the budget, I still look at this campsite as one of the big risks. While it's not part of the Baptist Union's financial statements, the Baptist Union can be exposed to it if the campsite aren't able to recover the costs and reimburse the Baptist Union. So when we look at the budget, we do need to be aware of that is probably one of the big risks that we are facing. So we go on to the next slide, which just gives you some indication of what's in the budget. And in this case, I've helped those that aren't mathematically minded to just give you some indication of the amount of the expenditure by giving you some indication in the size of the blocks. So we can see that we expect the major portion of the income to come from membership fees. And just to mention that if all the amount of membership fees came in, that amount would be close to 600,000 higher. And the same, well, not the same, in pastoral fees, the amount, if everything came in, would be around about 80,000 more. So that's quite a substantial amount. So we can see that on an overall basis that it is budgeted that income would go up by 14%. The majority of that is in the membership fees, with others going up by a reasonable amount, and as we mentioned, extra people paying their pastoral fees. So that is the income. Let's look at the expenses. As we already noted, the employment costs are the largest portion of the costs. And, sorry, next slide, please. Okay, there we are. Yeah. And then we've got the others that are there as well. The missions, a slight reduction there, and that is as a result of the board meeting. Instead of being physically, some of them are expected to be held by way of Zoom, and thereby they would also reduce costs as well. Also, there is an amount in 24 that relates to certain employment costs, but in 25 it is expected that those costs will fall away and that the work done by that person would be done by the pastoral support person. Property costs are expected to go down. Some of it is due to security. Colin, when I spoke to Colin this year, one of his big frustrations was the gate coming into the campsite. And that has been a big problem. It's been struck by lightning, and so he's had to incur large amounts to try and sort it out. He sorts it out, and then the problem reoccurs. So that has been sorted out by linking it more to solar now, and that has been operating a much better basis, and so it's expected that those costs will decrease. Also, there was a substantial amount of water costs that have been borne by the Baptist Union, which the Baptist Union have considered should actually be borne by the other tenants on the property. And so Colin has renegotiated the rent going forward, and as a result of that, a larger portion of the water costs will be borne by the tenant as well, which obviously helps the Baptist Union. And there's also an expected reduction in the electricity costs as a result of having the solar that is available there. The operating costs are also expected to go down, and that is as a result of the expectation that there will be less money spent on travel costs going forward, and also less spent on printing stationery as a result of not printing, as I understand it, the Baptist Union handbook. And then the others probably just going up by a normal amount. So on an overall basis, it's expected that expenses would go up by 10%. And then if we look at this slide, it brings it all together. We can see we've got income and expenses, and then we've got interest and tax. And so we can see on that basis that for next year, we are budgeting to be on a break-even basis. Whereas for 2024, at the moment, the projection is a loss of 300,000, which isn't vastly different from the budgeted loss of 257,000, which isn't great. I think it's only correct that we must be looking to at least balance our finances. Okay, so that just gives you a brief overview of the finances. So on the next slide, it says questions and comments. So at this stage, we can open it to those who might want to make questions and comments. And for this aspect, I will be helped by Colin and Greg, if required. So you want to?
Yes, I just want to make a question.
I think.
Okay. There's no matter. Thank you. My name is Tebo Minian from Mechanic Baptist Church. I'm just asking a question. I think it's on page 20 that you're presenting. Because from your presentation, Colin gives the indication that the only thing that's increasing the cost is the
Okay, I'll answer half your question. I think, as I mentioned a bit earlier on, as far as the employment costs are concerned, we've already got most of the money for the extra wages, extra salary costs. In addition, that was specifically why we had pastoral costs as well. Your second part of your question relates to whether we should keep the campsite or not. Now, that's not a decision of the Finance Committee. That's more a decision for the Board of Governors or the national leaders. So I will duck and dive on that one.
Can I clarify a point? I think it's misunderstood. On page 50, there's two big items that increases. It's your cost of employment and your campsite. Your campsite increases by 470, your cost of employment, just on the national administration at 670. That's why I'm asking the question to say we're going to add more staff on this presentation. Shouldn't we rather look at us first breaking even because the revenue we get to our right input? That means we're going to be making a bigger loss in the next assembly.
Can I just answer? I think Garth has answered already. So we have got provision for a year to 2 years worth of salary bills. So we can take the risk. We will be able to pay the salaries and it won't incur any extra costs on the budget because we've been donated money towards those two positions. The risk remains the campsite. And that is why we're asking the campsite to do what they can for 2025, to put a working plan in front of us, that at least they break even, that it doesn't become a burden to us. So that's how we're tackling that. The one is covered. If we run into trouble paying, we have reserves we can pull on, which will cover any of that, so you won't show a deficit on that. We've got about R1 million worth of in the salary reserves, because we cannot call a person. I cannot, in good faith, call anyone to a position and I can't commit to pay him. So we had to build up reserves first. So when we call a pastoral support person and a network person in the future, or a network outreach developer or whatever, that we must have some sort of guarantee that I can pay them. So that we have done. The one that is a problem is the campsite. They have to, this year we're going to have to look at it carefully to see if they can at least break even and they don't draw down on our funds. That's the risk. And to sell the campsite is not a thing that's going to happen in 2 months. To sell a piece of property like this can take a year to 2, because it is zoned as agricultural land, ecclesiastical land. You can publish here. There's a whole lot of links attached to who can actually operate on this property. We cannot sell it commercially. It has to be sold to an ecclesiastical organization. So that all delays the sale of a property, because there's not a lot of churches lining up to buy this for obvious reasons. So therefore, yes, if a decision is ever made to sell the property, it's going to take a year or 2 to sell the property or subdivide it or whatever we decide to. But we have made provision for the salaries. It's just the campsite that we're asking them to from themselves, they said, to put a working plan in place that they break even, so it doesn't draw on my funds.
Okay. So the answer is that we are going to be budgeting for a loss. The reason I was asking is that the reserves, till we sort out the issues of the 80 rands coming in, I think in Cape Town we used to call them the samosas. Till we sort that out, but we are writing off figures, and I'm more worried that we're actually not actually budgeting properly. Because we're budgeting for something that's not coming, and the loss that we are seeing, we're not factoring it in.
We spend a lot of time on the budget, and Garth is a senior chartered accountant. He knows about budgets. So he was just speaking, we spend a lot of time budgeting and looking at these things. So I just want to say that the budgets have been done accurately as we can. And we're not budgeting for loss, we're budgeting for a break-even budget this year.
It's Ruben Eilenfeld from Bethany Emmanuel. I sleep in the same bed as the person who runs the campsites. So if anybody knows about the pressure of worrying about where the money is going to come from running the campsite, I understand that person. She sleeps right next to me. I want us just to remember a few things. It's about 11 years ago that the ladies department, with a group of us, and I was part of that original committee, took over the running of the campsite. In that particular year, the campsite was costing the Baptist Union about 500,000 rand. For the next 6 or 7 years, the Baptist Union drew profit from the campsite of about 300,000 to 400,000 rand a year. That was aside from the fact that we had heavily invested in asset value build for the campsite. So all the bathrooms that you find on all those rooms there, those were all put on by the women's department. The lovely hall that you're sitting in now, it was done under that committee. So folk, we mustn't lose sight now that, you know, for the last few, let's not lose sight that we had COVID a few years ago. It hammered the tourism industry, and it also hammered the missionary tourism industry, if we can call it that. One of the benefits that the campsite had for a long time was that we had a number of foreign missionary organizations who were using the campsite, and they were pumping hundreds of thousands of rand into the campsite. Now, unfortunately, that's gone. And Colin is dead right. The reality is at the moment it's an expense. But let's not be short-sighted in this situation, folk. We also have, it's the Lord coming to answer the question there. We've also had asset growth on the campsite. In 11 years, the campsite has probably grown from maybe 20 million to 40 million. So, yes, I understand Colin's frustration trying to balance the budget. But folk, even the 700,000, it's not just 1 year's expenses, it's more than 1 year's expenses, that's 3 years. So the 700,000 sounds like a lot, but it's only been written off this year, but it's actually an accumulated expense over, loss over 3 years. So it is bad, and I'm not trying to justify it, I'm not trying to say, but let's not lose sight of the fact that there are many other benefits to this campsite as well. It has an emotional connection for people. It is a point of reference for us. You've just got to look across the valley there, and there you can find a cult with a bigger organization and campsite than we have. So why should the cult be blossoming and not us? So the bottom line here, I think, is, and that's really what Colin is asking the campsite to do, is let's increase the income into the campsite so we can meet the expenses. And we are the people who can do that. If you're having a church camp, if you're having a missionary organization that's coming here, let them come and use the campsite so that we can get the income to make sure that we can maintain the thing in a proper way. Thank you, sir.
Can I just please make the announcement? If you're going to speak, please speak into the microphone so that people online can hear you.
Grant Skippers, Connect Church. I see the slide says questions and comments, so I've got one question and a few comments. And I think Pastor Eilenfeld answered my question in part, but I think it would be helpful to actually hear the full answer. You've been referring, sir, to the campsite and the fact that the campsite isn't part of our BU financial statement. Would you be able to just inform me and us, when you say the campsite, who are we speaking about, if that's not us?
The Baptist Union has a number of different entities. So there is what is called the Baptist Union. There's another one called the Baptist Union Trust Funds. At the back there, we've got the Cape Town Baptist Seminary. There's the college up here. Now that and the seminary are separate. And then there's another one called the Maranatha Retreat and Conference Center. And that is what I refer to as the campsite. As was mentioned, 10 years ago, the ladies took on the responsibility of looking after the campsite. And to do that, they set up a separate organization to look after that, and you've got Patricia behind you who can explain that a lot better than I can.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you standing to answer my question? Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. When we speak about the campsite, we don't just speak about the Women's Department. The agreement with the Property Committee is that the Baptist Union and the Women's Department will run the campsite. We would develop it, we invested our money in it, and we have improved the facility. But it's not the Women's Department, it's the Baptist Union and the Women's Department. That is the agreement, and that is who makes the campsite. It's you and us. It's not just the Women's Department. It's always been a joint venture. Because we lean on the ground, I'm often the face of the campsite. I'm often having to make the decisions. Mostly the big decisions I would refer to Colin. Together we would make that decision. But the campsite is the Women's Department and the Baptist Union. We are not the owners. We have invested money, we improve it, we manage it, we help. If there's a shortage, it's not just the Baptist Union who's carrying the campsite. As a Women's Department, we too have a loan of the campsite, because the times when the Baptist Union didn't have money, it was the Women's Department that used our capital to invest in the campsite. So there's this perception that it's the campsite, the campsite, the campsite. And can I just say that in the past, before we took over, the expenses of the campsite was reflected in the BU expenses. So we are turning over, at the moment, our turnover is over R1 million, and the expenses of the staff and all the other expenses are being carried by the campsite. At the moment, we are struggling with the cost of electricity and water to make the development, do the maintenance, as well as to do the running of the campsite. The campsite cannot develop and use the income from its campsite. And Colin's point about not fixing the painting. If I fix the painting like I did last year and fix things, the wall being case in point, I can't pay the electricity. So sometimes, and I can't not fix things, because then your churches say, no, we don't want to go there. The walls are crumbling, there's mold in the rooms, all those kinds of things. So it's a constant tension between the two of them. But it's not just the Women's Department, it is the Baptist Union, and we do it together. Does that answer it?
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. So that brings me to my comments and just a few sentiments. I found myself quite, I'd say more than quite, extremely inspired today listening to some of the reports, and that didn't just start today. I think even yesterday we started on a high note, which climaxed yesterday evening. It was exciting, and I refer, Colin, to your part of the report of the National Leadership Council, and item number 1, where you say we must ensure that evangelism, church planting, and missions receives priority from all our church leadership and members. And it was exciting to hear so far what's happening in the BNA in terms of ministry, especially within the youth space. It was exciting to hear what's happening in the WCBN, and I'm sure we'll hear similar things from the other regions when they do get to report, and from the colleges as well. It was exciting to see our national ministry leader get out to the churches, and for me, that even forgives an increase in expenditure for travel, because that's what, I was part of that original working group from 2014, and part of the national ministry leader was we didn't want that to be an administrative position. That was the person that was supposed to get to the churches, and I'm pleased to see that that's happening. I'm excited to see that we're looking to put in place a national pastoral support developer, because we're starting to see the coming together of a vision, what has come on about a number of years. That being said, the fact that we've got this whole, and I think some of the previous speakers have tried to allude to that, that we've got this whole, for me, our primary offering to the world is not providing a campsite. What we are here about is spreading the gospel. And so if it's taking so much energy, and Pastor Eilenfeld spoke about the pressure of maintaining and keeping things going, for me, I'd rather that energy is spent on our main thing. I'd rather that money was spent on our main thing. However, I also share the sentiments of this campsite. This campsite is significant for us as a Baptist family. And I've heard in Collins' report, we heard in the chairman of the Board of Governors, that maybe it's not a kind of a all or nothing thing, which appeals to me because I tend to be quite prudent, and I tend to want to be patient about these kind of things. You've both alluded to it. There is no proposal or no motion that we're going to be speaking to from the NLC about the campsite. And I'm not sure if one could be developed from this discussion. But if I could give some suggestions as to what that might look like, I'm sure there are the NLC, the finance people, and the campsite would be maybe better suited to kind of what those details should be like. But I like the idea of seeing it as an opportunity. If the campsite can generate the funds needed to do our main thing while still being part of the main thing, for me that sounds like a win-win. You know, so I like what has been mooted about putting in place a plan of feasibility, a plan of profitability for the campsite. I would like that to include things like the painting and like the maintenance, so that we can make an informed decision that we can continue, but it's going to need this much work. But then also in the same breath to take a firm decision, and here we almost need to put sentiment aside, that if it doesn't work and whatever the boundaries or the criteria are in terms of timelines, if it doesn't work, then we have to sell the campsite. And so it's just a suggestion, and these points are just like, I'd probably rely on the NLC, the Finance Committee, and others to kind of flesh out what that could look like. So I'm offering it as a suggestion, not a proposal.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Grant.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Kurekani from Randbeck. And I just want to ask, because you spoke heavily on the fees paid by the pastors, as